The movie opens with two teenage girls, Sherry and Trudy, sitting comfortably discussing the Stab Movies, a fictional horror franchise based on the original Woodsboro murders. They debate the predictability of horror films, with Trudy mocking Sherry's fear of scary movies. Suddenly, Sherry's phone rings. The caller has a distorted voice, asking creepy, invasive questions about horror films. Trudy assumes it's a prank, but the caller's tone shifts from playful to menacing, hinting he's watching them. Suspense builds as the girls search the house nervously, only for Ghostface to appear abruptly, stabbing both girls to death in a brutal, bloody attack. But just as the shock settles, it's revealed that this is actually a scene from Stab 6, a movie being watched by another pair of girls. This sudden twist pulls the audience into a layered meta-horror experience right from the start. Chloe and Rachel, the two girls watching Stab 6, joke about how over-the-top and formulaic the franchise has become. They mock the endless sequels, jump scares, and reliance on cliches. Their banter quickly shifts as Rachel criticizes the killer's lack of creativity. Without warning, Chloe turns to Rachel and stabs her in the stomach with cold precision, revealing she's the real killer. Chloe chillingly states that motives are overrated, showing no remorse. However, another twist unfolds. This scene is actually from Stab 7, adding another layer to the movie within a movie setup. The audience is left disoriented, questioning what's real and what's fiction. This clever opening sequence sets the tone for Scream 4's meta-commentary on horror tropes and reboots. The real story begins in Woodsboro, where high school friends Jenny and Marnie are hanging out at Marnie's house. Jenny teases Marnie by pretending to be attacked, causing Marnie to roll her eyes in annoyance. Their playful mood shifts when they receive a mysterious phone call from an unknown number. The distorted voice on the other end asks, "What's your favorite scary movie?" echoing the chilling calls from the original murders. At first, the girls think it's a prank, but the caller becomes increasingly threatening, describing details only someone watching them would know. Suddenly, the power goes out, plunging the house into darkness and heightening the tension. Marnie is dragged off screen screaming, while Jenny desperately tries to hide in the garage. Ghostface catches her, brutally stabbing her multiple times before leaving her lifeless body behind. The next morning, Sidney Prescott returns to Woodsboro for the first time in years to promote her new self-help book, Out of Darkness. Sidney has transformed from a victim into a survivor, using her traumatic past to inspire others. Sheriff Dewey Riley, now married to Gale Weathers, who struggles with writer's block after leaving her career as a journalist. Sidney stays with her Aunt Kate and teenage cousin Jill Roberts. Jill is dealing with her own problems, particularly her recent breakup with Trevor Sheldon, an ex-boyfriend who won't stop contacting her. Jill's best friends, Kirby Reed, a horror movie enthusiast, and Olivia Morris, are curious about Sidney's return, especially given the fresh murders in town. The small town of Woodsboro is once again gripped by fear, with whispers that Ghostface has returned. Sheriff Dewey and his new deputy, Judy Hicks, investigate the brutal crime scene at Marnie's house. Dewey examines the evidence and realizes the murders are eerily similar to the original Ghostface killings. The killer left behind clues, including a cell phone used to make the threatening calls. Meanwhile, Gale feels restless and frustrated with her stagnant life. Despite Dewey's warnings, she decides to investigate the case on her own, eager to reclaim her fame by uncovering the identity of the new killer. Gale's determination leads her to the local high school, where she suspects someone may be connected to the murders. Her instincts tell her that the killer is trying to create a real-life reboot of the original Woodsboro massacre. This realization fuels her obsession with solving the case before it's too late. At school, Jill receives threatening text messages from someone claiming to be Ghostface. The messages are unsettling, referencing personal details that only someone close to her would know. Jill tries to brush it off as a sick joke, but the fear lingers. Later that day, Sidney encounters Jill and Kirby, offering words of encouragement. Suddenly, chaos erupts when Olivia is attacked in her bedroom, right across the street from Jill's house. Sidney rushes to help, but by the time she arrives, Olivia has been brutally murdered in a horrifyingly gruesome scene. Blood covers the walls, and Olivia's body is mutilated beyond recognition. Sidney finds herself face-to-face with Ghostface for the first time in years. A violent struggle ensues, with Sidney using her survival instincts to fight back. She manages to injure the killer, but Ghostface escapes before Dewey and the police arrive. The incident shakes the town to its core, confirming that Woodsboro is once again under siege. The media descends upon the town, eager to report on the new wave of killings. Gale, frustrated by being sidelined, sneaks into the crime scene to gather clues. She's convinced that the killer is following the rules of a horror reboot, trying to outdo the original murders with more brutality and shock value. Sheriff Dewey holds a press conference, assuring the public that the police are doing everything they can to catch the killer. However, the tension between Dewey and Gale grows as she accuses him of not taking the investigation seriously enough. Meanwhile, Jill and Kirby try to return to some sense of normalcy, but the fear lingers. Jill's ex-boyfriend Trevor shows up uninvited, raising suspicions about his motives. Sidney, determined to protect her family, insists on staying with Jill and Kate. As night falls, the sense of dread intensifies, with everyone wondering who will be the next victim. Gale, determined to crack the case herself, infiltrates the Woodsboro High Cinema Club, where a Stabathon is being hosted, a marathon screening of the Stab films. The event is filled with horror enthusiasts dressed as Ghostface, making it the perfect hunting ground for the real killer. Gale secretly plants hidden cameras around the venue, hoping to catch the murderer in action. As she monitors the footage remotely, she notices one of her cameras being tampered with. Realizing the killer is there, she rushes back inside. Gale searches the darkened venue but is ambushed by Ghostface, who stabs her in the shoulder. She fights back, managing to escape as the killer disappears into the crowd. Dewey arrives just in time to get Gale to safety. This attack makes Dewey realize that the killer is always one step ahead, watching and planning every move. Gale, though injured, is more determined than ever to solve the case. Meanwhile, Sidney comforts Jill, whose fear is growing with each passing hour. Jill's mother, Kate, tries to reassure her, but there's a palpable sense of doom hanging over them. Later that evening, Sidney decides to stay with Jill and Kate for protection. However, that night, as Jill and Kate are preparing for bed, they hear strange noises outside. Kate goes to investigate, only to be ambushed by Ghostface at the front door. Despite Sidney's efforts to save her, Kate is stabbed through the door's mail slot, dying in Sidney's arms. Sidney realizes that staying in the house isn't safe, so she and Jill attempt to flee. However, Ghostface is relentless, chasing them through the neighborhood. They manage to escape and head to Kirby's house, where a small gathering is taking place. The house is filled with Jill's friends, including Trevor, whose sudden appearance raises more suspicion. As the party continues, the tension escalates. Sidney warns everyone to stay alert, but her advice goes largely ignored. Suddenly, the power goes out, and Ghostface strikes again. The killer attacks the partygoers with brutal efficiency, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Sidney tries to protect Jill and Kirby, but they become separated during the chaos.
Ghostface taunts them, forcing Kirby to answer horror movie trivia to save their lives. Kirby, a horror expert, correctly answers the killer's questions, hoping it will spare them. She believes she's succeeded, but in a shocking twist, she's stabbed by Charlie, one of Jill's friends, revealing himself as one of the killers.
Sidney is eventually cornered.
Sidney is horrified as Charlie explains that he and his accomplice are creating a new narrative for the modern era, a reboot of the original Woodsboro murders. The second killer is revealed to be Jill, Sidney's own cousin. Jill's betrayal is devastating as she explains her motive. She's jealous of Sidney's fame and wants to become the new survivor of Woodsboro. Jill craves the attention and notoriety that Sidney received after the original murders. She and Charlie plan to frame Trevor for the killings, having already tied him up and shot him to make it look like he was the mastermind. Jill, obsessed with authenticity, stabs Charlie to eliminate any loose ends, leaving herself as the sole survivor. She then brutally injures herself, staging the scene to make it appear as though she barely escaped with her life. Jill smashes her face into a mirror, stabs herself in the shoulder, and even collapses next to Sidney's seemingly lifeless body to complete the illusion. Jill is taken to the hospital, praised as the sole survivor of the Woodsboro massacre. However, her victory is short-lived when she discovers that Sidney is still alive. Jill's frustration boils over, and she sneaks into Sidney's hospital room to finish the job. She attempts to suffocate Sidney, but Sidney fights back, determined to survive once again. A brutal struggle ensues in the hospital room. Gale and Dewey arrive just in time to help Sidney. Jill attacks them both, wounding Dewey and nearly killing Gale. However, Sidney outsmarts Jill, using a defibrillator to electrocute her and then shooting her in the chest. Jill collapses, finally defeated. As the dust settles, Sidney, Gale, and Dewey reflect on the nightmare they've just endured. Despite her injuries, Sidney remains resilient, refusing to let her story be defined by tragedy. Jill's body is taken away, her dreams of fame and infamy shattered. The film ends with news reporters outside the hospital, declaring Jill a hero, unaware of the true story behind the Woodsboro murders. The cycle of violence may be over for now, but in Woodsboro, the shadows of the past are never far behind.